Tonight, we're taking a chance as we tap into our spiritual side. Anybody know what their spiritual side is? That's good. I am not talking about religion. I am not talking about religion. I am a Christian. That is my faith. I'm not asking you to be a Christian. If you want to be one, I can show you how. But it is not required. I have respect for all faiths. All faiths. But what I'm talking about is not faith or religion. I'm talking about spirituality. So I want to get clear on what I mean by that. It means, my definition is living your life with an open heart through love. What's the difference between religion and spirituality, or is there a difference?
Well, some say that religions, people don't want to go to hell, and spirituality, people who've been to hell already. Religion should be the structures, the prayer tables, the things that you do in the course. It should help you, it should cultivate, it should be the practices, it should be the symbols, it should be the rituals that cultivate your sense that there's more.
Today we can continue on our series, Spiritual But Not Religious. Knowing that there's a growing number of people who self-identify as spiritual but not religious, but there's a growing number of people who are sitting in the pews on any given Sunday that actually also resonate with that term spiritual but not religious. And as I start to be honest, which is always a good thing to start a sermon, right? Be honest and upfront. I work at a church. I'm a part of a church. I'm going to seminary. And yet I struggle with organized religion at times. So I grew up in the church, and I've experienced some things, and I've seen some of my friends experience some things that have actually turned me away from church for a certain period of time. And ever since I've come back, it's still an interesting relationship, because organized religion can be oppressive and dogmatic and kind of harsh. And so there's a struggle, I think, that a growing number of people are feeling. And what's interesting about this series is actually that's a central message, too, of the life of Jesus. Jesus is a person who lived and who struggled with organized religion as well, especially any kind of religion that was dogmatic or oppressive, if that makes sense. A while back, we had a doubt day here at One Church. We do this annually. So one of our core values here at One Church is that questions and doubts are welcome. And so what we did is we just took everybody's doubts or questions that they had, and we kind of addressed and engaged like the top 5 or 6 of those. And the number one most asked question here had to do with other religions or people of other religions. Are they saved? Are they right? How do we engage with people of other faiths? And so today we're going to talk about a spirituality in a pluralistic world. And in a sense, there's a couple different ways of approaching this idea of other religions. There's more of an intellectual approach, which is kind of, do other religions, are they right or are they wrong? Are their beliefs right or wrong? How do we think about other religions? And then there's more of a spiritual approach or a heart approach, which is how do we engage with people of other religions? How do we live at peace in a pluralistic world? And so we're kind of going to talk more about that second way. They're both important and they're both helpful, but we're going to leave the first one for another time and talk more about the second one. So as we do, there was an article I read this last week, and I read articles, and I don't know if you guys do this, but it's like the first 5, I don't read articles. That's not what I said. That's funny. No, I don't read articles. But as you start to read an article, it's like the first 5 sentences. If they don't grab you, it's like, okay, forget that. Let's read something else, right? And so there was an article that was written by a guy named Greg Carey, and he is a professor of New Testament at Theological Seminary in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And he wrote an article that was published by Sojourners magazine. And he started off saying this: lots of our public conversation these days relate to boundaries. So I was hooked. I was like, oh, yeah, I can resonate with that. There's so much arguing over boundaries. Should we welcome refugees? People from Syria, a nation torn by civil war and terrorism? How should our society respond to others who have immigrated here without government approval? So there's a lot of that going on. And then the next sentence, and you can read along on the slide, just caught it. He said, setting up boundaries amounts to a mechanism for coping with anxiety. And I thought, doesn't that just capture our current, not just political, but religious climate that we're living in? So it made me think and realize, again, that actually fear and anxiety is the story of our time, at least right now. There's a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety. I'll never forget, concerning other religions, the first time I kind of encountered this in any sort of form. I was at church, actually at a church service, and I was just finished up at the coffee cart. So we had a fancy coffee cart in the back with an espresso machine, and I had worked coffee at that time. So I was making lattes and macchiatos and all that other stuff. And afterwards, I went to the back during worship service, and I sat down at this table. And my wife and I, we were we were leading a young adult service at that time that was on Sunday nights. And there was another leader that came and sat next to me. And somehow the conversation turned to other religions. And she started talking about Muslims. And she proceeded to tell me her concern that so many people are letting Muslims into our Christian nation. And that so many people are allowing them to set up mosques. And I was like really taken back. I was like, well, what do you mean? We're about freedom of religion. They should be allowed to come here and worship. And she said, yeah, but they're strategically infiltrating our nation, trying to take it over. And we as Christians should stand up and fight against that. And I left. I mean, of course, I pushed back. That was like 6 years ago. But I left extremely frustrated. But this was a person, it was a young person. It was a middle-aged person who had some education, was a leader in our church and our community. So it wasn't like some young punk just spewing off their gut reactions about things. But this actually, I think, some people, there's a growing people, not a growing, but there's a certain number of people that kind of see the world this way. And that conversation, along with some others, made me reflect on the trajectory that my wife and I were heading versus kind of where that social community was at, or the consciousness of that community was at. And what we began to be aware of is that there is a group of people, a way of living in the world that views everything else as a threat. Does that make sense? And so I began to see that science was a threat, that psychology was a threat, and this is still true, that people who are gay are a threat, right? People who are other religious or other views are a threat. And then my wife and I had this conversation. We're like, man, we are so changing the way we live, and it's so exhausting to live that way because you're always having to defend against everything. It's like you're always looking out for everything that's going wrong and everything that's happening. And we begin to see the fear is the thing that's driving that machine. There's fear of other people, fear of the unknown. And so fear is a major thing in our world today. So concerning fear, I have a short video. This video is by Rob Bell, who we saw at the beginning of the series this morning. And Rob Bell, he's a pastor, an author, and a spiritual leader. And I think he captures very well what's going on in our society having to do with fear. So let's go ahead and watch that video. Wow, there's so many good things in that short clip. I love when he talks about if you feed fear, it only grows. And reflecting back on the intro video of this series, where Oprah talks about spirituality and just, in a sense, saying spirituality is a sense of being open. And what does fear do? Really, it closes us down. Now we have to protect and we have to create boundaries and defend, right? And so the underlying question of that video that stuck out to me is, where are we putting our energies? Right? Where are we putting our energies? Are we going to react out of fear? Are we putting our energies to create more barriers, to create more divisions? Or are we going to put our energies into a place where it breaks down barriers? It breaks down those divisions. And so, of course, that's the story of Jesus' life, right? But a lot of this can seem abstract, so let's try to get a little more practical. What does this mean for us? Well, what does it mean for the stay-at-home parent who's watching their kids? if it's not practical for the stay-at-home parent, I think it's not practical for any of us. Sometimes we get these fanciful ideas like, oh, that sounds great for the big leaders, right? The presidents of the countries, whatever, the religious leaders, but what about me? And so in your setting, what does it mean to live from a place where you're fighting against fear and you're pushing against those boundaries that I've been creating? So as a stay-at-home parent, you're raising your kids. So you're teaching them how to live in a world that's sometimes full of fear, how not to react out of fear, and intentionally how to engage with people that look differently than them, that think differently with them, and slowly, time and time again, intentionally allowing them to grow, to ask questions, to be okay with people who see things differently, and to say, you can use your gifts and your talents to work towards a world where there's less divisions and less barriers, and encouraging our kids as they grow and develop in that way. And they can go on and do all kinds of different things. What about the retired person who says, I'm retired? If you are retired, you have the most amount of resources that you've ever had. If it's not money, it's time. So where can you put your time? Are there causes that you can invest in and say, I'm going to give my time to this cause because I know this cause is fighting against that fear and those divisions, and fighting for unity and peace and love. Of course, there's education. How do we bring up and educate our young people with cultural sensitivities, ethnic sensitivities, religious sensitivities? And there's healthcare. There's all kinds of different areas that this can come into play. But what does it mean in your context to do that? Are you putting your energies towards that's what's creating more fear and barriers, or are we putting our energies towards that's what's breaking down those barriers? Continuing on that article that we talked about, we're going to read the last little paragraph of that article together. Not out loud, but I'll just read it. You can follow along on the slide. It says this, or Greg Carey writes, Jesus' message is shocking not because he extends the boundaries to include others. His message shocks because it doesn't recognize boundaries at all. When we feel pushed to our limits, we build walls, and Jesus recognizes no walls. And I thought, the more I read and understand the life of Jesus, the more this shines through. Constantly fighting against those barriers, often by religious structures, but also political structures. Oh, you don't talk to these people? I'm going to go out of my way and engage with these people. These Samaritans, they're of a different religion than you. You ignore them. They ignore you. I'm going to go out of my way to engage with them. So drawing from the life of Jesus, who gave actually his whole life's mission, was more or less saying, I don't see these barriers that people have put up. They don't exist. They're not there. So now we're going to transition a little bit. We've been talking about fear. And I read something somebody posted on Facebook recently. And it said the opposite of fear is trust. And I thought that was really insightful. The opposite of fear is trust. So this last summer, I took my kids swimming a lot, because that's what you do, right? When you live in Arizona, you're either in the house or you're at a swimming pool. And so I have two little boys, ages 6 and 4. And our oldest, he's like a little fish. And he took the swimming, and he's just awesome. And they went through their first swimming lessons this last summer. And I remember the instructor saying, well, he needs to work on his backflow, right? And so I remember afterwards taking him out to the pool a bunch of times, like holding up, putting my hands on his back, right? And saying, okay, you got to relax, right? And which is so like counterintuitive. Like you spend your whole time swimming, you're fighting, you're in control of the water. Relax is like counterintuitive. So I'm holding him up here saying, just relax. Just trust that the water will keep you afloat, because it will. If you just relax, put your arms out. And so here I am trying to teach him how to do that. And in life, it's very hard to learn how to relax and trust when we're fighting constantly, trying to push and trying to manipulate. So what does it mean to trust and to relax, knowing that the water will hold us? For some people, belief has much more in line to do with mental assent. Does that make sense? So the things that you believe, you follow that checklist. All that checklist, often you believe these right things. The problem with that, and there's some truth to that, but the problem when that becomes the focus is that the opposite of belief then is doubt, or raising those questions, or not being sure I check off all those things. But I think actually belief has much more to do with our English word trust. So one exercise you can use that I've done in the past is when I'm reading the Bible, I just swap the word believe for trust. So when it says believe in me, and I just read trust in me. Trust. And there's an interesting thing that shifts and happens. See, I think that the teaching of Jesus was much more about a way of living in the world than it was about a set of beliefs to buy into. So one scripture verse that I come back to time and time again as we're kind of following along the book of John is in John 13, verse 35. And it says, Jesus was speaking, and he says, "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." So this is one of those things that I come back to time and time again when I get frustrated with organized religion, when I'm not sure what I believe about certain things, and I come back to the fact that this is what Jesus' core message was all about, right? Teaching people how to love. Teaching people, this is what matters. When he says, "Come follow me," he wasn't inviting people to come follow, and then I want to train you to enlist in these 365 doctrines. I want you to check them all off, right? He was like, "Come follow me, I'll teach you how to live in this world." And the fruit of that will be love. Will be love. So how do we engage with people of other religions? First and foremost, primarily, we do so with love. That is our aim, that is our hope, that is the goal, is love. First and foremost is love. And not that kind of hokey love. I don't know if you've ever experienced this or seen this happen where it's like, well, I just need to tell you you're wrong because I love you so much. Or I just need to tell you that I'm afraid of your eternal security because I really care about you. That has much more to do with that person and our own egos than it actually has to do with love, genuine love. And so I keep coming back to 1 Corinthians 13, if you're familiar with that passage, and it sheds light on what actual love is. Love is patient, it's kind, does not envy, does not boast, it is not proud, it's not rude, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, keeps no recollection of wrongdoings, it always trusts, always hopes, love always perseveres. I think that's a beautiful picture of us as we engage with people who are different than us. Saying, first and foremost, love. Follow that guidepost. So coming back, actually, one thought about that. There's a growing movement of people that are a part of what's called interreligious dialogue. Anybody familiar with that? Which is just basically people from different religions coming together, saying we're going to shelve any desire to sort of proselytize or convert. We're realizing that we all are in the same world, and we can't keep fighting against each other. So let's figure out how we better understand each other. Let's dialogue. What do you believe? Why do you believe that? Tell me more. And there's also a growing number of people that are realizing, often out of religious dialogue, that the kids are walking by and they're just like waving, so it's a slight distraction. I'm like, hi. Out of that, there's a growing number of people that are beginning to move together to actually work for peace and justice and love in our world. And so, do we have differences? Absolutely, we have differences. But I think our differences are actually a beautiful thing, something to kind of celebrate. I'm thankful that we have Mexican food and that we have Italian food. I mean, I'm thankful that not all food is exactly the same. We have different cultures, different people that reflect the beauty in different ways. Can we celebrate diversity and say, we might not agree on everything, but if we're putting our energies towards all the things we don't agree on, is that wasted energy? What about all the people that are dying because they don't have enough food? What about the people that don't have clean water or health care, right? What about education? How can we partner with these things that actually matter so much more? And some people are realizing that at the center of many, if not all religious traditions, they share a lot of common core values. It has been suggested in one way or another that all religions, and many spiritual people understand this as well, even if they're not religious, that the center is this idea of the golden rule. You all familiar with that? Do unto others as you want people to do unto you. Right? Jesus actually says in Matthew 6, it's part of the Sermon on the Mount, that he says that all the law and the prophets hang on this one thing. Do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. And as people of different religions, if we focus on that and center on that and realize, hey, we have a lot that we share. Now, there's some diversity, and that can be celebrated, but we have a lot that we have in common as well. Where are we going to spend our energies? So finally, coming to the very end of the Gospel of John, we've invited people to read through the Gospel of John with us. Today is kind of centered on John 18, 19, and 20, which is known as the Passion of Jesus, which is all about Jesus' crucifixion. So I want to invite you guys to read along one part of that, which is found in John 18. And starting in verse 10, it says that, "Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it, struck the high priest's slave, and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. And Jesus said to Peter, 'Put your sword back into its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?'" So here, Jesus is coming to the end of his life, probably realizing that everything I've been teaching is very hard for some people, and it might wind up that I might lose my life. I think that he had a strong notion that this is where things might be headed, right? Some people don't like that when you mess with their boundaries, right? Some people don't like that. So who here in this text reacted out of fear and a sense of needing to be in control? Peter. Peter did. And often what happens is people react violently. Violence is the result of that. Peter was very attached to what he believed Jesus was supposed to be, which was this coming king, conqueror, throw off the Romans who had occupied the Jewish people, throw them off, and we will crown him as king. So very attached to his view of what Jesus was supposed to be. Reacted in this moment out of fear and probably a desire to be in control and probably a desire like, this isn't right. Maybe felt kind of like self-righteous. Sometimes that happens. Violence can actually be the result of people feeling like they are speaking on behalf or for God. And often, when you get underneath the surface, though, it's fear. And so, Peter responds this way, out of that sort of sense of attachment. And so the question that I draw out of that is, then what am I attached to? Are there things in my life that I am attached to? And this can vary from anything from bank accounts to relationships, to be honest, I'm attached to how people view me. Do people like me or don't like me, right? Your job, success, keeping up with the Joneses, what are we attached to? Because whatever we're attached to is also where fear kind of dwells. And then how does Jesus respond? Jesus responds with surrender and trust. Jesus says, "Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?" So surrender and trust, saying, I'm putting my energies over here, and it might wind up that I die because of it, but I'm going to surrender that outcome. And I want to take a moment and pause, because for some people, that passage can seem like, or suggest that everything that happens because God wills it. Or that for some people, they view God as sort of a divine puppeteer, like pulling all of the strings, making sure everything happens. But that's very problematic for some of us. I had a friend, a childhood friend, who recently passed away because of cancer, a month before her 32nd birthday. And so if somebody were to come up to me and say, "Oh, that happened because God willed it," or because God caused that, everything within me would say, no. Like, I can't accept that kind of view of God. Like, what kind of God would cause that? And yet at the same time, I don't have the answers, right? But I can surrender and trust somehow, in some way. I trust that she now is in a better place. I trust that she is now no longer suffering. I trust that somehow God's working through that situation and through those people. And yet I don't believe for a second that God willed that or controlled that or gave my friend cancer. I don't need to be in control of everything. I don't have to have all the answers. Faith, spirituality is much more about being open and trusting than it is about having all the answers or finding a checklist that you mentally ascend to. So my hope as we conclude today, I'm just going to end with a couple questions. That we've been reading together the life of Jesus and seeing his frustration with what I would call unhealthy forms of religion, with any kind of view that oppressed or marginalized people. I think we can draw from the life of Jesus and his own struggle with unhealthy forms of religion, with anything that oppresses, any fear-based ideology. And so I wanted to leave us with two questions tonight. And the first one is, which we already talked about, but is there anything in our lives that we fear that we're attached to? And let that kind of sit there. Anything in your life that you fear you're attached to. And the second thing is there, basically, where are you putting your energies? Are you putting your energies to creating more boundaries? Or are you working towards putting your energies to move through those boundaries? And there might be actually a third option in there, which is, that's so much work that I'm just sitting here. And I'm scared that if I step out, I will fail. Or if I step out, people will laugh at me, or I won't succeed. Or it's just so much work. It's actually hard. Look at the life of Jesus. It wasn't an easy life. So there's actually a third option. Where are you putting your energies? Are you hoarding your energies? Are you keeping them because you're out of fear, you're afraid, you're insecure? I think the world, we need our energies, all of our energies, to go towards working for that greater good.